to LBS and the ABC for this kind invitation to join you in kicking off this very auspicious program today. I thought I would begin by just touching quickly on, why international trade. Obviously, the fact that you've all joined us today indicates that you have at least a minimum interest in international trade, and I imagine many of you are really interested in launching yourselves into the international environment. But just very briefly, I would say that the UN has noted that trade is central to ending global poverty. Countries that are open to international trade tend to grow faster, innovate, and improve productivity and provide higher incomes and more opportunities to their people. So trade benefits nations as well as the businesses that are engaged in international business creation. Open trade also benefits lower income households in the trading countries by offering consumers more affordable goods and services. So having spent my entire career in international trade and business, I may be a little bit biased, but obviously I am committed to spreading the good word. And one of the things that we discovered during my time in the US, counseling US businesses on international trade, was that it's really critical to have your ducks in a row and understand trade. It sounds glamorous. We all want to travel. We all want to experience new countries, cultures, but there is a lot of technical information that goes into being a successful international business. And getting that right from the beginning is the key to whether your business can succeed or not. Some of the benefits that accrue to international or to small businesses that are engaged in trade: increased revenues, decreased competition, longer product lifespans, easier cash flow management, and better risk management because you're spreading your risks across multiple markets instead of being dependent on one market. You can benefit from currency exchange. There is access to export financing, which I will touch on just very briefly shortly. And then you can, it's also obviously a way to get rid of surplus goods that may not be moving in your home market, but for which there may be continued demand overseas. So what I'm going to touch on very quickly, moving from kind of the esoteric why international trade and why is it so good, I thought I would dig into some of the details that you need to arm yourself with as you're considering whether or not to engage in international business. And so this is a quick outline of what I'm going to touch on. I will go into a little bit of detail on each of these topics. However, I will not be diving in to the nitty-gritty, and I would encourage you all, if you're especially interested in international trade, to consider reaching out to some of the resources through the American Business Council, through LBS, through local trade partners and multipliers, associations, businesses already engaged in trade, and some of the reading material that I will note later in the presentation, and arm yourself with the information you need to be successful. So very quickly on market research, I'm not going to go into this in any great depth, but there are all sorts of online databases available to you to research the markets that might be a good fit for your product. And so the key is identifying the top markets for the particular product or service that you are looking to sell. It's not as simple as, I've got an uncle who lives in Atlanta or in Ghana, or, those may or may not be good markets for what it is you're seeking to sell. And so first of all, identifying your markets through proper market research is critical. For purposes of the presentation today, I'm going to assume that everyone's interested in doing business with the US. And for that reason, ABC is obviously a critical resource here in the Nigerian market. It's a trade association, a U.S. chamber affiliated trade association of U.S. businesses that are operating on the ground here in Nigeria, who have a lot of historical information and data that they can share, anecdotally. So moving from market research, the next really critical and somewhat technical exercise you need to go through is classifying your product. And here we're going to talk about the harmonized tariff system and what we call HTS or HS classification codes for products. Next slide, please. Oh, can I move the slides? Okay. So internationally, there is a formalized process for classifying products according to codes, or what we call harmonized system codes. And countries around the world use this classification system in order to simplify treatment of goods, like goods being entered into the commerce of their country. So the harmonized code system consists of 6-digit numerical codes that classify products according to very specific parameters, that is what they're made from, what their purpose is, etc. The first 2 digits of any code, or the chapter as it's called, is the largest umbrella classification for a product. The next 4 digits identify more specific qualities of that product and are called the header. And then finally, the last 6 digits within that HS code are classifying the product to a subheader level, which is a very, very specific level of classification. Next slide. Thank you. So the harmonized system is created, again, it ensures universal treatment of your product across customs clearing agencies, regardless of the country. In the US, as referenced on this slide, the US Customs uses these codes to classify products. And using that information, they then determine what duties and other tariffs may accrue in terms of bringing that product into the United States. The same holds true for other countries. So here in Nigeria, when products are brought in, ideally, Customs is looking at the HS classification, and they then have guidelines as to what the tariff on that particular HS code is, whether it's 10%, 20%, and that ensures that everyone that is selling a specific class of product, let's say Tupperware plastic containers, Tupperware is a brand name, but plastic storage containers into Nigeria are all treated and assessed the same tariff as they come into the country. So it creates an equal playing field, but what it also tells you, if you are the buyer or the importer, it tells you what additional costs are going to accrue in terms of obtaining that product and what you need to add to what we call the landed cost of the product when you're selling it in the market, the destination market. Why this is important is because if you don't take the time up front to figure out what your landed cost of doing business is, that is, what is the cost of your widget in the US versus what you charge in Nigeria, you could stand to lose money. And obviously the goal of international trade is to make money. So the first thing you need to figure out is, how are your goods going to be treated going into the destination market, and how does that affect the cost and price of your product? Next slide. So in the US, we refer to the harmonized system as Schedule V codes. The first 10 digits, the first 6 digits are the HS classification, and then each country reserves the right to add additional categories that are unique to that country for data collection purposes and other purposes. So when a US exporter sends a product out, they have to file paperwork through an automated system, and they need that export classification code or HS code in order to complete the paperwork, because the Census Bureau in the US then uses that information to collect the data about what products are going where in the world. This then forms one of the potential market research resources for people trading with the United States. US Census maintains all of this data about what products are going to which countries. And so you can measure the demand over time for a specific product traded between the US and various countries around the world. Next slide, please. So this is just a screen capture of what the HS or HTS classification manuals look like. As you can see up here at the chapter level, it's a very broad description. Wine from fresh grapes, including fortified wines. And then below that, when we get into the subheading, we have sparkling wine. There's other wines that are fermented. And then we have even a more level of specificity in containers holding 2 liters. We also have effervescent wines, and so on. So as you can see, each level of classification adds a different specificity to the product that you're exporting. And so the key in classifying your product is to look very carefully at the HS manuals and guides. They are volumes and volumes of information long. And in the United States, we have a testing system for import brokers who deal with these classification codes. And it's a class that takes months and months of study, and you must pass the exam with a certain grade in order to become an authorized import broker in the United States, just due to the complexity of this process in and of itself. Next slide, please. So in the US, we also have something called Customs Rulings Online Search System, or the CROSS system. And what this is a database that is searchable of various customs rulings that have been made over the years. So even with this very elaborate classification system, there are sometimes disputes over how classification has been made. And those disputes go before a court to reach a ruling, and those rulings are kept and used for not just historical purposes, but they become the case law wherever there is a contested issue that relates to that particular classification. So it's always important to reference the cross rulings if you have questions regarding classification of your product. Next slide, please. So very quickly, the next step, once you've determined how your product is classified and determine what markets you're going to be looking at, you need to give some thought to how you're going to finance your transaction. Unless you're dealing in very small level exports, you're going to be concerned about cash flow, and you're not going to want to be doing all cash transactions. In this case, next slide, when working with a US partner, some things to consider are resources that are available to you as a result of working with a US buyer or seller. So these are resources that US companies have. They're not accessible necessarily to foreign companies, but they are if you are trading with a US partner, because your US partner can access these programs to help leverage various deals. So there are a number of Ex-Im Bank and US SBA programs that help with export financing and deal making when you're doing business with the US. Other international resources to consider: development finance institutions such as the US Development Finance Corporation, or DFC as it is called. This is a relatively new mechanism that has been around for about 2 or 3 years now. It was a consolidation of various US government international financing resources from USAID, OPIC, and others. We recognize the need to have those consolidated into one body. So the DFC is an international financial institution that is available regardless of country of origin. And in fact, they are uniquely interested in and focused on deals in the developing world, in particular on the continent here. We do have DFC representatives in country here in Lagos, as well as across the continent, that we can put you in touch with if you're interested in making those connections. Next slide, please. The next part of your process in the transaction is determining the terms of your deal, whether you're buying or selling. There's something called international commercial terms, or Incoterms, that are, again, used worldwide. So these terms, regardless of who your buyer or seller is, what country they're located in, they should recognize these terms of commerce. They were first introduced in 1936 by the International Chamber of Commerce. They are revised periodically to reflect changes in the international environment, and they were last revised in 2010. Why this is important is in terms of how you use Incoterms, and I will get into that in just a second. So Incoterms must use a place and location. So they are 3-letter codes that specify the means of transportation as well as who is paying for shipping and insurance of the product to and from the buyer and seller. So one thing to note is Incoterms are not the same thing as Uniform Commercial Code Terms, or UCC. This is something that U.S. companies often may get confused about. So if you're dealing with a U.S. Buyer or seller and they're trying to refer to UCC terms in your contract negotiations, you want to try to redirect them and insist on working with the Incoterms framework. So the current version of Incoterms that are in use are available online and free. There's no charge to access these terms. Next slide. And it is very important to use them properly. They can also be used very strategically. So this is another reason to educate yourself about, some of the common international terminology and frameworks that are used in international business, because they can become deal breakers in terms of not only your negotiation with your buyer or seller, but also in terms of how much profit you may or may not make on a deal. So Incoterms determine the transport obligations, that is the freight and shipping documentation, the risk transfer, that is the risk of loss in transit before it gets to the buyer, and the cost transfer between the buyer and seller. That's all. I mean, that's a lot, but people often confuse Incoterms and think that they also determine the transfer of ownership or the point at which money transfers hands, and that is not the case. They only determine the transport obligations, risk of loss, and the cost transfer between the buyer and seller. So transport obligations may include the pre-carriage movement of your goods from wherever the inland origin point is to the port or airport of departure, the main carriage of the goods, that is getting them from the port of departure to their destination point in the foreign market, and their onward carriage from that port of arrival to their final inland destination in the market to which they are being exported. Next slide. So Incoterms are not law. They, however, should be, as a best practice, specified in your contract. That is your contract with your buyer or seller in order for them to apply. So once they are incorporated into a contract, they do have some legal bearing, but in and of themselves, they are not legal instruments. Some things that Incoterms do not address: passage of title, as I mentioned, for the goods, or the recognition of revenue, the payment for the goods. They don't address remedies for breach of contract. They don't address how the container may be loaded or vessel loading. So that's all dependent on who you pick as your shipper or freight forwarder. Incoterms are divided into 4 groups, basically: C, D, E, and F. And the rules are classified according to fees, risk, and responsibility for the various formalities involved in transportation of your goods. All right, next slide. So this is just a quick picture of the various groups that I'm referring to. And you'll see in Group E, there is only one term. It's called Ex Works. This is a category that we don't typically recommend US companies use, although many do, because they believe that all of the responsibility and liability for on their side ends the point at which they make the goods available to the buyer at their factory. There are a lot of challenges with this particular term because it also gives the buyer access to your facility in order to package and transport the goods from your factory onward. And that's handing over a lot of responsibility to your buyer that you may not necessarily want. Group F terms cover, they make the goods available to your buyer at a designated point outside of your actual manufacturing facility, but you're still not agreeing to pay for the carriage to your buyer. The buyer is paying for carriage. And then the Group C terms, you're paying to get the goods to a designated destination point, either at the port or inland. And finally, we have the Group D terms, which are the most comprehensive in terms of the seller's responsibility, where you're agreeing to get the goods, shipping and insurance paid to the buyer's, either warehouse or a designated destination place. There are pros and cons to all of these. That's why I do encourage you to reference the International Chamber ICC website and familiarize yourself with the details of all of these terms. But just to give you an example, next slide, please. So this is the FOB term and how it can be used. If you're using FOB, which stands for free on board, and you have designated a shipping point, that is, it's free on board at Lagos Apapa. So in that case, the ownership of the goods transfers when the goods are delivered to the carrier at the port, and all of the transportation costs are paid by your buyer. If you're using FOB and some destination point in the market, the destination market, the ownership of the goods transfers when the goods are passed to the buyer, not to the carrier. And the transportation costs are paid by the seller. So this is just how, this can get a little confusing, and I encourage you to work closely with a good customs broker, freight forwarder throughout the process until you get to a point with your business where you're able to bring that specialization in-house. Some of the pitfalls, for example, next slide, please. So some of the common mistakes people make in using Incoterms is not specifying the geographic location. So it's not enough to simply say FCA. It is important to say FCA, Lagos, Nigeria, for example, or if you're the buyer and you're taking possession of the goods in Los Angeles, California, for example. And then Incoterms and the year of the terms that you're using. So it is possible to use Incoterms from a previous iteration, but it is recommended that you usually use the most current version of Incoterms. As I mentioned earlier, we usually recommend to our small to medium-sized US companies not to use the term Ex Works because the exporter in that case is always still liable for filing specific paperwork with the US government as the exporter. However, when using the Ex Works term, you release all the responsibility for that to your buyer, who in many cases is not going to be familiar with the US export paperwork and system and not be able to complete that for you. So you then have a liability without the ability to meet it. So we recommend instead that people use the FCA term or free carrier because this basically works the same. You're giving responsibility to your buyer for all of the transport, insurance, etc., from a specified point of departure, but you handle all of the export paperwork and packaging of the product to the buyer. Next slide, please. So we do recommend use of FCA in place of FOB or free on board, as well as FAS or free alongside for marine inland waterway transport. The FCA term is met when the exporter has the goods delivered to the point of departure. At that time, someone signs receipt for the shipment. And you can't always control when the goods are delivered alongside of a ship. So use of FAS and FOB entails a lot more risk on your part if you are the exporter. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on the rest of these terms, but the C terms are typically used by exporters, that is sellers, who want to provide more customer service to their buyers, because it enables the exporter controls the shipping arrangements to the destination port, and so they also control the costs of the shipping, and in many cases can realize cost savings because they are resident in that country. They can make all the appropriate shipping arrangements. The D terms are for an option for exporters that really want to provide a high level of control as well as customer service. So for items that may say be controlled for export in the United States, and the exporter needs to make sure that they're delivered specifically to a specific buyer in a specific location to have control over all of the paperwork, then the seller may use the D terms in those Incoterms. Next slide, please. So a best practice is to use the C and D terms. When you're using the C and D terms, is make sure that payment for your goods is through a letter of credit. And this goes back to the financing. So you want to make sure you've got your financing in place. Establish good banking relationships locally with banks that deal internationally, so that when it comes time and you want things like letters of credit, your banks, can work with you on this. But the best practice internationally is to deal with in letters of credit when using a C or D Incoterm as part of your transaction. That way the freight forwarder works for you as the seller or exporter, and any discrepancies in the letter of credit involving shipping documents can be more easily fixed. Next slide, please. So as you can see, a lot of these technical details that I'm touching upon tend to intersect at various points. So you may be working on many of these things simultaneously, and you'll see where they begin to impact each other. In other words, your financing has a bearing on how you structure your Incoterms in your negotiation with the buyer, and vice versa. So those are all things to be aware of as you're proceeding. Some agencies in the U.S. that regulate exports, I am not as familiar with, Nigerian government export process and agencies that beyond customs, obviously, that would have a bearing. But in the U.S., to be aware of when you're dealing with the U.S. buyer or seller, we have the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and they're responsible for, assessing those HTS codes as they come in and what costs of import there might be associated with, as well as filing all of the export paperwork and collecting the statistical data that we keep in the United States. We also have the Bureau of Industry and Security, which is a U.S. Department of Commerce agency, as well as the DDTC, or the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, which is a State Department agency. Both of these agencies have a hand in export licensing and working on controlled export items. Depending on the level of export control and the type of item, one or the other of these agencies may have responsibility over the process. And that is something that, if you're buying from the US, you would need to be, your seller will take care of all of that, but you may need to be aware of it and factor that into your timelines. You may also be requested to provide certain information, because both of these agencies, at times, depending on, again, the product, are interested in knowing who the buyer is, where they're located, and what they plan to do with the product. When you get into agricultural and food products, we have the US FDA. They issue export certificates. So if you're buying from the US, there are certain products that have to have an export certificate for things like medical devices, pharmaceuticals, vet products, processed foods, nutritional supplements, things that go in or on the human body. And this is really a product qualification to ensure the safety and security of the products that we're selling. OFAC, or Office of Foreign Asset Controls, is located in the U.S. Department of Treasury. They also get involved in export compliance in the sense that the U.S. maintains a sanctions program. There are certain countries and individuals to which U.S. companies cannot sell, and that program is overseen by the U.S. Treasury Department. U.S. Department of Agriculture, again, comes into play when we're talking about agricultural products. They issue export certificates for plants and animal products, and phytosanitary, they oversee the phytosanitary guidelines. Likewise, for products coming into the U.S., they also provide various import verifications to make sure that products coming in meet U.S. standards for sale to consumers. Next slide, please. Some references and resources I would encourage you to look at as you consider getting involved in international trade. Export documentation information can be found at this link, trade.gov, which is a U.S. trade website maintained by our organization. There's a wealth of information, some of which is relevant only for a U.S. entity, but a lot of which is relevant for anyone involved in international trade. So it is a good resource, as is our U.S. Commercial Service Basic Guide to Exporting. Again, it looks at the process from the perspective of a U.S. seller, which may or may not be relevant to you, but there is a lot of core information in there that I have touched upon in this presentation that you may benefit from. It is available for free via download, again, from the trade.gov website. An excellent book, The Global Entrepreneur, Taking Your Business International, which is in its 4th edition. This is sort of the, not to misuse the word, but it's sort of the Bible for international business professionals. And it is the basis upon which the international trades credential, the CGBP that was mentioned earlier, which stands for Certified Global Business Professional, is based. This is a certificate-based program that you can sit for the exam, and then if you pass, you meet that CGBP qualification, and that conveys to certain U.S. companies, U.S. employers, and others that you have a specific set of information and knowledge in your portfolio related to import and export. And then lastly, there's some really good information on trade documentation, shipping and compliance, videos and guides at the website noted for Aloka Enterprises. This was a company that we worked with in the United States on a number of export training classes that we gave to our US SMEs. Next slide. So I'm going to touch on some of the common export documents that you may hear referenced to, or that you should become familiar with if you intend to engage in international trade. First of all, we've got the pro forma invoice, and this becomes sort of a mechanism for your sales quotation between the exporter, that is the seller, and the importer or the buyer. It confirms to the buyer what the exporter's sale price is for the goods, the terms of sale, ideally the Incoterms, terms of payment, currency for payment, and the validity period for the quote that is being given, as well as an estimated shipping date. So this is basically where the seller gives you their conditions for sale. And it becomes a point based on which you can begin your negotiation as well. So you don't necessarily have to accept at face value everything that's provided in a pro forma, but it does, put in writing what the actual terms of the quote are, and it gives you, therefore, a starting point from which to negotiate your deal. Next slide, please. So from the pro forma invoice, ideally, once you proceed to an actual deal, you will use the pro forma invoice to then create the commercial invoice. So the commercial invoice really should mirror whatever terms you arrive at from the pro forma invoice. This is used by a U.S. exporter to complete the customs paperwork that they need to complete the sale to their foreign buyer. It is also used to determine the value of the goods that are coming into the market, that the buyer is bringing them into, and any value-added taxes, et cetera, that are due on importation. A packing list, extremely critical. This should always accompany your shipment. It is created by the seller, and it's a very specific list of what is contained in the cargo package. Your bill of lading serves as the receipt for your cargo and the contract for transportation between the seller and the shipper. So this can be used for ocean, truck, or rail transport of goods. So the bill of lading can be either non-negotiable or negotiable. The critical difference being a straight bill of lading is a document of title, that is possession of the actual goods that are being transferred in shipment. A clean bill of lading is issued when the shipment is received by the carrier with no indication of damage or shortages. And then any damages resulting from carriage would result in a foul bill of lading. So really what that does is it documents that the responsibility for damage lies with the shipper and not with either the seller or the buyer. And then if you're shipping by air, an airway bill of lading is used. It is different from an ocean bill of lading, and it is used exclusively for air cargo shipments. It does not and cannot constitute a document of title. That is, it doesn't represent title transfer, unlike an ocean bill of lading. Next. So it's something to be very, very careful and aware of when you're if you are shipping and taking responsibility for shipping and transportation to the seller or the buyer, whatever your role is in the transaction, things do go wrong. So this is a picture. I know it looks very dramatic. Sadly, it's not entirely uncommon. I mean, you have these tremendously large freight ships going across vast expanses of ocean. They encounter all kinds of weather, harsh seas, and sometimes, things don't always go according to plan. So this is a case where the ship was, broke in half. Much of that cargo spilled and was lost in the ocean. And so we always have to prepare for contingencies in international trade. Next slide. It's another example of things that can go wrong. Ships can capsize, and once they become offloaded to one side, it's really hard to right a ship and prevent it from happening. So we want to talk about and think about cargo insurance to go with the shipping. Next slide. So when it comes to insurance, some things to consider. There is, basic insurance that comes with your shipping contract. However, it's generally not adequate to really cover the total loss of your product or damage to your product, particularly when we think about general average. So general average is it's a very, very old maritime law that is still in effect. If your cargo becomes damaged in transit during ocean shipment, or if it has to be jettisoned, so the captain has the right on a ship to determine if somebody's cargo needs to be offloaded in order to preserve the rest of the ship, They have the right to make that decision. And if it ends up being your cargo, you then, as the shipper, become liable for that loss, particularly if your buyer's already paid you for the merchandise. So the financial loss for any damages that are suffered on the ocean during shipping is shared by all of the shippers on a vessel that have been exposed to the harm. And the shippers each pay a proportionate share of the total financial loss from that incident. So the captain of the ship has the right to declare general average. If he declares general average, then this is what happens. And so even if your cargo was preserved, when it gets to the destination, all cargoes are kept in storage until every single shipper pays their share of the damage that was assessed, even if you're getting your full cargo back without damage. So the seller or exporter will often arrange shipping insurance, even if the Incoterm that you're using determines that the buyer is going to absorb the cost, simply because, if you get caught in one of these general average declarations, you may have to come out of pocket thousands of dollars that you were not expecting as part of a transaction. So you would then add the cost of insurance to your commercial invoice and designate the buyer as the beneficiary of the policy. That way, if something does go wrong, the buyer then is protected, and so are you as the seller. Next slide, please. Some other export documents you may encounter in the course of your international business career are certificates of origin. So WTO countries were World Trade Organizations, and Nigeria is a signatory to the WTO. So WTO member countries where there is no actual free trade agreement or other trade agreement in place sometimes require a certificate of origin, which basically just states where the product was manufactured, or where the inputs for that product were obtained, and whether or not. So let's say you're manufacturing something here in Nigeria using inputs from let's say Ghana. So your certificate of origin would be for here. You would then have to document that whatever product you imported from Ghana in the use of producing the product here underwent a substantial transformation in the process of your manufacturing it. If it did not, then it would have to have a certificate of origin from Ghana. A substantial transformation really just means that the product changed tariff codes, that is that HTS classification code. So let's assume you were importing raw material from Ghana and creating some manufactured product with it, that the raw material was classified under one HTS code, and by the time you finished manufacturing it, you're going to be exporting it using a different code. That qualifies as a transformation of code, and it would then classify for export as a Nigerian product and under Nigerian certificate of origin. Next slide, please. So there are templates available to facilitate your creating certificates of origin, and the rules and guidelines for certificates of origin for WTO countries, and again, Nigeria is one of those, can be found at this website. It contains all of the rules of origin for countries that are signatories to the WTO. When you're dealing with US traders in your international business, we have a number of specific US free trade agreements, and there are specific certificates of origin that pertain to those. So in working with a US buyer or seller, they may ask you for additional information in order to complete one of these specific US free trade certificates of origin. Next slide, please. All right, so I think that covers all of, not all, but a large quantity of the terms, technical terms and documentation that you're going to encounter in the course of engaging in international trade. Again, many of these topics go much more in depth, and I would encourage you all to take advantage of the links and references and resources provided here in order to upgrade your knowledge on specific topics, as well as work with specialists in these areas. So freight forwarders, logistics providers, customs brokers can all be important partners in your international trading experience. And the U.S. Commercial Service, the American Business Council are resources to connecting you with qualified and trusted partners in trade and in terms of service provision in the international business environment. So I welcome any questions if we have time for that. I'm happy to share the presentation so that LBS can send this out to those of you registered for the webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a great presentation and very informative. We will try to keep the questions for after the other speakers have spoken, just in the interest of time. I didn't want to stop you because your talk was really, really useful. There was a question while you were speaking that sort of alluded to the fact that you may be speaking to the US exporting to Nigeria. But my understanding was that it could also apply either way, Nigeria to the US, as well as US to Nigeria. Would you like to clarify that, please?
Yes, indeed. I mean, some of the information I presented is definitely specific for a US business. Looking at the international trade, we have specific rules and regulations for our US exporters that they need to comply with. That is of interest for a Nigerian business who is trading with a US company, just for awareness of the information and data that they are required to present and that they may require of their Nigerian trading partners to assist in completing the documentation. But much of what I presented today is information that as an international business, you would need to equip yourself with. So, everyone really should understand what the HTS classification of their product is. Everyone should understand what Incoterms they wish to use in their negotiation with the buyer, because these things all impact the price of your product. And understanding what the price of the product you're either selling or buying is will also tell you whether or not there's a good market for it, and you can sell it at the price point at which you're going to be obtaining it.
Awesome. All right, so I hope you can stay with us while the other speakers share some points with us, so that when it's time for the questions, everyone can then take part in the Q&A session. So just wondering, are you able to stay with us, Jennifer, for the other speakers to take their...
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay. All right. So once again, thank you. And let me quickly introduce one of the three other speakers who will be speaking with us today. So we have Terfa Ashwe. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Terfa is an experienced legal professional with a demonstrated history of working in international trade and development industry. Skilled in international economic relations, policy analysis, trade-related capacity building, business development, and trade gender issues. She comes from an interdisciplinary background and draws her expertise from a background on trade development, international environmental law, regional integration, gender, and SME competitiveness. Ms. Ashwe started her career in Nigeria as an NYSC junior counsel in the law firm of Obafemi Adewale SAN in 2009. She has since gone on to hold positions at the International Dispute Resolution Institute, Abuja, the ECOWAS Secretariat, the World Trade Organization, the Nigeria Office of Trade Negotiations, and the International Trade Center. In her professional, so basically, so this is, well, okay, so let me just say the last sentence. So her professional interests are in sustainable and inclusive trade, SME competitiveness, and women's economic empowerment. So you're very welcome, Terfa. And I was just wondering, you seem to have a lot of knowledge about trade issues between Nigeria and Canada. So I was just wondering if you could sort of tell us about what the opportunities are, and from your experience, what the opportunities again and pitfalls are for Nigerians who are interested in getting involved in international trade. Thank you. You're muted, Ted. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. It's I think so far for me the session has been very enlightening and very interesting. Some of the topics and issues that the previous speaker Jennifer Woods shared are things that are very important to small and medium-sized enterprises, whether you're exporting to any country really. There's the US or Canada or other places. It's important for you to, have the right trade capabilities. And because in the end, countries can put together policies, they can come together and have agreements, and you can have access to financing and things like that, and all of that is good. But without the right capability, both on the side of whether you're a firm or an individual that's interested in getting to export, or a collective of firms, it's important for you to be able to have the ability to generate, assimilate, communicate, and transfer know-how, whether it's skill or tacit knowledge on your industry. So it's very important for you to be able to, to gather that kind of capability. And one of the ways in which you do it is, of course, attending sessions such as this, because here you're able to get information on market needs of your target market, how you can adapt your product to meet the needs of that particular market, to understand better your customer within that market, and how you can, overcome some of those hurdles and challenges that have been highlighted, whether it's the technical issues that you need to address, how prepared are you to actually, venture into this export process? Is it something that's off the whim, or have you done your market research? I know the earlier speakers touched a little bit, but I would also emphasize that market research is extremely important, and they are the general and very important technical issues that you need to know, like the HS codes and the specific certification requirements within the market that you're targeting. But also very important is for you to actually even start off understanding if what it is that you produce is suitable for the market that you're targeting. Is there a demand for the particular product within that market? If there is a demand, are you producing at the specifications that are required within that market? How can you adapt? Do you have allies within that market? How can you... Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. And basically ways in which you can design a market entry strategy that is beneficial to your business and is reflective of the opportunities that you have identified, as well as the threats and the risks that you will need to balance going in. So just in terms of general comments, I'll just say that yes, there is a lot of it's more than just having this aspirational thoughts. It's attractive to go into export. Of course it is. International business has a lot of benefits for the small and medium-sized enterprise. You get to earn in Forex, you get to experience different cultures, you get to improve your competitiveness, but also it's a deliberate action that you need to think through and make sure that you're thoroughly prepared before you jump into, because it could be a make or break moment for your business. So yeah, that's what I'll say to start off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Terfa. Okay, so let me just quickly swing to Adetokunbo Adewoyin, and I'll just read a brief excerpt from her profile. So Adetokunbo Adewoyin is the principal consultant of Fortress 20 Commodities, a foremost agricultural exports management and consulting firm in Nigeria. She's a certified international trade finance professional from the London Institute of Banking and Finance, UK. She's also an alumnus of the Agribusiness Management Program of the Lagos Business School. She has over 13 years experience in agricultural commodities and containerized exports with robust and practical knowledge in local sourcing, international trade, export documentation, export financing, export logistics, export accounting, and export regulations within and outside the country. She facilitates training on exports and has worked on various projects in the agricultural export space locally and internationally. She has authored books on exports and hosts regular free export education webinar series which seek to educate, inform, and sensitize the general public on the opportunities available in the export ecosystem. So Adetokunbo, you're welcome. And it's great to know that you're in the agribusiness space, which is one of those areas that has been considered to replace oil, or at least help Nigeria diversify from oil, promising a lot of employment opportunities as well as export opportunities. There's a global crisis now and of products and services. On one hand, the UK is suffering that because of Brexit. On the other hand, the US is seeing that because of the scarcity of microchips. So I think that this may be an opportunity for Africa to sort of fill in the gaps by supplying those products that can fill the shelves, if not producing the chips as well. So you're from the agribusiness space. So what opportunities do you see that Nigerians can harness? And how do you advise people to take this on?
Okay, thank you so much for having me on this panel this afternoon. Yes, for the agribusiness space, there are a lot of opportunities that abound in the agribusiness space. And it's quite interesting to see that most of our people are beginning to take advantage of those opportunities. We're moving from just exporting raw materials to value add. And I've been in Abuja the past week and working with women exporters who are really taking advantage of value add in the agricultural commodity space. The recent migration of Nigerians into diaspora has created a very, very huge market for our locally consumed foods. And so those things are being packaged to meet international standards and are going into the export space. In the agri-business space, there are quite a number of opportunities that we have not begun to maximize. And those opportunities are across the value chain. If we start from export farming, which is not yet a thing, which means that even before you produce anything, you are producing according to export specifications, then we can begin to harness some of those opportunities where the farmer is not producing flawed products, because no matter how much value you add to a product that is flawed from the farm, then at the point of production, it will just not meet international specifications. So value add in agriculture is a very, very important opportunity. Some other things, the byproducts are also things that can be exported. For example, a lot of people don't know that the cashew nut shell liquid is anti-rust. And so a lot of people use it for coating for ships, for coating for anything that you don't want to be rusted. And so once we begin to explore value add, it's a very interesting opportunity. Another opportunity that has come up strong came up with COVID. You know, the health sector, a lot of people are moving towards natural ingredients, and that offers a lot of opportunities for us. And we have all these natural ingredients in abundance. Our ginger skyrocketed during COVID because ginger from Nigeria is about best in the world. And then, you know, ginger, moringa, a lot of health products are beginning to have a market in the international market because of COVID. COVID exposed a lot of people to choices that are now health-based. So I think I'll stop here so that we can take it up later.
Thank you very much, Adetokunbo. So let me quickly introduce Tola Onayemi, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Norbase, a company starting, scaling, and operating a business across Africa, easy and democratized. Awesome. He formerly served as an Assistant Chief Negotiator for Nigeria and Head Trade Remedies and Investigating Authority at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. Adetola is also the winner of the Future Africa Awards in 2019, the 2019 Prize in Public Service. He previously co-founded Future Africa, a fund focused on helping innovators convert Africa's biggest challenges to opportunities in furtherance of the mandate of the Federal Executive Council and the Nigerian Economic Management Team. Adetola worked with a global law firm to develop a trade remedies infrastructure for protecting the Nigerian economy from injurious and unfair trading practices from foreign countries and companies. He is presently working on the full implementation of the Nigerian trade remedies infrastructure through the NOTN and select committees in the negotiating forum. He also participated in the pivotal work of negotiating the African Continental Free Trade Agreements. Right, okay, so let me just say the last thing. He is the incoming curator of the Abuja Global Shaper Community and presently serves as a legal director. Right, Adetola, very, very interesting CV and background. And I think that you bring a very, very useful perspective to all we've been discussing. So yes, export is one of the main ways to convert the unfortunate devaluation of the consistent devaluation of the Nigerian naira into an advantage, because if your money is devalued and you're a net exporter, it actually improves your economy. However, as I say, sometimes you have danger dollars. So what are those dangers that exporters face that they should be aware of to keep them safe? When I'm talking export, I'm not just talking about export to the US or Canada, but also export across African countries, which is the main purpose of the African Continental Free Trade Agreements. Thank you, Adetola.
Thank you so much, Henrietta, and I'm glad to be here. I can see some of my previous colleagues, Terfa. Thank you so much for this. I'm a big fan of the Lagos Business School. In fact, one of the big hires that we have on the team, Ope Ashiru, actually is in your modular MBA program. So I'm super excited about what you're doing at Lagos Business School. So I'll jump in very quickly. I think one of the interesting things to highlight very recently, right, is one of the initiatives by Afrexim, which is called the PAPS program, right, which basically tries to create a seamless infrastructure for central banks and for banks within Africa to actually translate currency amongst themselves. And so one of the things that happens today, right, you talked about danger dollars, right, is that the entire global economy is domiciled in dollars, right? So what that means is that even if Nigeria is doing a trade with Ghana, to a great extent, you actually have to do some conversion to dollars. So what happens is that you take the Naira, convert it to dollars, and then change from dollars back to, say, cedis, right, or whatever currency. And that's even within the continent. The issue with that is that you're losing a lot of money for conversions along the way. When you pile on that, the fact that the infrastructure for sending money across the continent is rather broken, right? We have a bunch of fintechs, some of them that we're investing in, who are trying to solve those kind of problems. The truth is, it's still just broken. And so businesses lose a lot of money along that entire value chain of trying to get that big money out. Even trying to buy things from China, right? There's been conversion of the Naira yuan swap and all of that. So one of the things that Afrexim is trying to do is to create a regime where you actually can do direct currency, almost like what happens in the European Union, right? Where you can actually do a direct Naira to cedis conversion using one central settlement system. And they have all the central banks having those conversations, and it's actually pretty advanced. And I hope that they close that out pretty quickly, because I think that's one of the big wins for businesses. But talking to exporters more particularly, and talking to business people and business advisors, such as those that are mostly on this call, right? I think a number of things to say but are very important. One of them is to be very aware of your cost liabilities. So we talked about trade financing, right? One of the big things that actually attacks businesses very quickly is doing trade financing purely in dollars and having no edge for it, and then having to do transactions and make returns in Naira. So imagine a scenario where you've gotten a trade finance facility that's entirely in dollars, you have no edge in Naira, right? And so what happens is that you've done this shipping, and just between the time when you've done shipping and the products are arriving in Nigeria, dollars has maybe gone a bit volatile. So your products are a lot more expensive than what the market currently offers. And then secondly is that the credit facility you have to return could double in value in one night, right? So imagine a world where you're going to pay $1,000, right? And it was 360 and that was maybe 3.6 million. And suddenly you're going to be paying 5.7 million when it's now 575. So that's one big issue. Strategically organizing your business around edge is one big thing. So one of the big things that I've had to advise business over the last few months is find structures within your business that actually edges for the dollar, especially if you're doing business in Naira, right? Or in any other currency that has such volatility value. And there are a lot of strategies people have done about. One of the things people have tried to do, if you're big enough and you can muzzle it, is to try and do a Naira-based deal. Some businesses are beginning to push for Naira-based facilities, right? That's one. The second thing you can try to do is to find other concessionary places within your books to try and make up that kind of. So, e.g., saying, listen, we know that there's a risk here, and so we're going to actually optimize for off-takers before we actually start the transaction, and a bunch of those other things that ensure that you can actually. There are also cases where people do things like trying to use offshore transactions, where you can have if you have big off-takers here in Nigeria, you can have them pay for the product outside of Nigeria. Of course, you need to deal with the CBN on that a bit because the CBN has concerns with dollarization for that. But like, there's a lot of that you can also do. That's one big issue. So just being aware of the volatility of the dollar is one big thing. I think another big thing is also being aware of what time delay means for transaction. So one of the things that have happened, and I have a personal experience with this because this is one of the things that affected my parents' business back in the day, is issues with clearing and tracking your shipment. So just being able to, because one thing that happens a lot is demurrage, right? You've imported goods, they're coming in by shipping, right? They arrived at the ports, you can't track them, or you can't find them, or you can't clear them quickly enough. And so demurrage is rising on it. And so what's happening is you are more risks to the time value of that transaction. I think that's a big thing that exporters and importers also have to note. If you're an exporter, you're a lot more advantaged because one of the things that you can do most importantly is that you actually can design your system to make money in dollars pretty quickly. And I think that one of the strategy edges I say for people that have to do a lot of importing is to actually have an export edge, right? So if you're a business that relies a lot on exporting, what you want to do is find in the component of your business, what can you export? And use that as an edge for your import risk, right? So for instance, and what that does also for you if you're a big business is that it ensures that you can strike deals with shipping lines so that they're not using empty containers, and you can use that actually to move your goods around. So I know a particular business that I had advised back in Lagos. What they do is they import large chunk of machinery. And so what they do is when that comes in, they get out products that can be exported that are subcomponents, and it's also in dollars, right? So what they do for that is it ensures that they don't have to bring money into the currency in the country at all. They just settle the transactions between their parties abroad, or even when they have to, they can actually make money in dollars to balance out that risk. That's another big issue. I'm trying to be as practical and not get too overly theoretical. That is very important. But I think generally the important things is getting a good business person, and this is where Lagos Businesses comes in, right? And all the experts in this room, getting a good business person to actually design your books. If you have to rely a lot on export and import, and dollarization and currency exchange is a big deal for you, you want to actually be intentional and about having a business strategy for it. In business, will say you want to understand your flywheel, because you want to understand the different joints of your business, so you understand how you can design business strategy that ensures that you're not holding the bag, you're not the one that makes a massive loss. So for instance, one of the interesting ways about that is shifting the base of how you make your profits, right? So I've seen businesses have structures where instead of relying on buying and selling, they've used off-takers, they've used partnerships, they're willing to use venture-backed money to figure out some of these nuances and kinks over time. Yeah, just some of my thinking around it.
Okay. Awesome ideas. And I think that what we have here amongst us all here is an ecosystem that can actually support a successful export of exportation from Nigeria to any country around the world. And this is sort of thing that requires maybe an office or something to help that people can go to get the information that they require. Great. So there are quite a number of questions. Kingsley, you may want to read out some of the questions that you have received so that we can take a few before we close. The set closing time for this event is in 20 minutes. So I think we can take a few questions. So Kingsley, would you like to read out the questions? And if it's directed to any panelists? Kingsley,
okay, thank you. So the first question I have here, just a minute, please. So do we have trade commissions? If we do, how are they actively supporting businesses in promoting and providing export opportunities and emerging market awareness? That is one. Which countries do we have bilateral relationships with? Where do we go to find out more information about this? Where do we get information on upcoming trade shows and webinars as it relates to this country? Then what are the procedures for international trade? So I think I would like to direct the first question about the trade commissions to Terfa, if she can help out.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, we do indeed have, we don't call it the Trade Commission, we call it the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. It's based in Abuja, and I believe that they have offices in each geopolitical zone in Nigeria, including several states, over 21 states. If you're in Lagos, there is a regional office right there in Lagos. The NEPC is extremely helpful with businesses. They have a program that they run, they call it the Zero to Export program, where you can come in as a novice within the export space, and they give you the entire step-by-step hand-holding on what you need to do to start to export. I think all you need to do really is to register with them. You get and you'll be able to get access to all this, to the webinars that they have, access to trade fairs that they have, access to information about different market opportunities, so we do have that as well. Because like I said, I have worked a lot with women entrepreneurs, and I don't know if we have a lot of them in the room. But again, if you are a woman entrepreneur and you're also interested in doing export, we also have a very strong women's export program that they have housed within the NEPC as well. If you go to their website, they have a dedicated page where you can get access and connected to.
Okay.
Seems she's her internet is acting up. Okay. So maybe we can take another question while
Okay. There is a question here for Adetokunbo. It says, how can entrepreneurs access finance for international trade, and what would be the recommendation for entrepreneurs or SMEs for involvement in international trade?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So one of the reasons why most entrepreneurs don't access finance, and finance is readily available, the Nigerian Export and Import Bank has a facility for exporters and importers that is a single-digit facility. But one of the reasons why most entrepreneurs don't access those facilities is because they are not structured. So from the beginning of your business, there has to be a structure. You have to be seen to be a business, not just yes, you're an MSME or you're an SME or you're an entrepreneur, but it has to be structured so that when they are asking you for those requirements, and then there are some facilities that are women-based facilities. I know there's the YF, which is a women and youth export facility. There is the SMEF, that is the small and medium export facility. So these facilities are readily available, but then you have to be structured. You have to be able to show track record for your business. You can't be doing business with your personal account and think that you're going to access those kind of facilities. And those facilities are readily available. So for anyone who wants to venture into international trade and the export space, you know, we have moved recently from just export training to export readiness, because we have discovered that a lot of people who want to venture are not even ready
Okay, so I think we've lost her. Okay, all right. We have more questions coming up in the chat. So Kingsley, have you finished your questions so I can read out these questions from the chat from my end? Okay, so very quickly, so Chibuike is asking, can hedging FX abroad work considering you need to fund NXP accounts with export proceeds? I think this one is for you, Tola.
Yeah, there are interesting structures around that, particularly if you can design a regime where, your market does not, your product does not, sorry, I'm a bit distracted. Particularly you can design a regime where you satisfy. So the NXP has specific requirements, right? You must declare some things and all that. But like, it's a bit different when you design an export and an import business, because what happens is that then you have but you can have two parallel tracks. It's basically an issue of business strategy. You can have two parallel tracks where one product is getting out and one product is getting in, and you can build two lines for both of them, and one can be buying dollar from the other. So like, it's been done consistently. There's a bunch of ways to design around that, and that can be easily done. Yeah. So the NXP would apply to your exports, but if you're building an import product line as a business, also you can. It's getting good lawyers who understand the rules around this, basically.
Okay. Now, the second question from Mike is to Jennifer. It says, please, what is the United States doing to counter intellectual property thefts that may arise from any potential business partners in Nigeria who may be acting on behalf of the Chinese government?
Thank you for the question. So we, around the world, actually are working to counter intellectual property theft, and we do that through a combination of capacity building in local markets. And so we have been very active in the 4 years I've been here. We have a attaché up in Abuja who has been convening stakeholder groups across the Nigerian industry sectors, including Nollywood and others, and pharmaceuticals that are highly impacted by intellectual property theft, to discuss what a good intellectual property framework looks like. Because the first step in IP enforcement is, of course, having an actual legal framework in the domestic market that you are then enforcing. So without a legal framework that identifies what the protections are that are provided in, say, Nigeria, there's nothing to fight against. And so that has been a lot of the work that we've been doing here in my time, is trying to assist in the construction of that framework by pulling together stakeholders in Nigeria who are also impacted by potential IP theft. And by bringing all of us together, I think we get the critical mass and capacity we need to communicate to the Nigerian government about the need for good IP protections in terms of the law. And so once that is in place, then we can proceed to enforce IP protections that exist around the world.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Emeko is asking Terfa to please share the link to the site she was referring to. And then Nicholas is asking, what is the first step to getting buyers for agricultural products, specifically cashew nuts? And this question is to Adetokunbo.
I'll attempt to go first. Hopefully my service provider doesn't knock me off before I complete my statement. The website it's the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. If you go online, you just, if you search for them, you'll be able to, they will come up very easily. But also just to end again, I think I was just saying before I was cut off, I was just saying that the information that you need about export opportunities is out there. Outside the NEPC, the ITC also have very rich database on market intelligence. They have several platforms and that you can access as a small and medium-sized enterprise. I know that I think they've worked very closely with the Lagos Business School as well. They have their SME Academy that also trains for free small and medium-sized enterprises on export opportunities and how to develop an export plan. And I guess also some of the things that that my colleague right now will be talking about, cashew, and how to identify the right market for your product. But I would say, I guess, for any product, the first question really is, where is it that you're trying to export to, before you start to ask about what it is that you need to do to get there. But I'll let her take the reins from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Terfa. So for agricultural commodities, like she said, it depends on where you are moving to. And then for the cashew, you see there's raw cashew nuts, there's cashew kernel. And so if you're talking about cashew, you need to be specific on what part of cashew you're exporting. If you are exporting the raw nuts, then Vietnam, India, Singapore, Dubai does a lot of that. If you're exporting the cashew kernel, that's the one that is ready to eat or processed already. Then most EU countries, and then the US, Australia, all those other countries do that. Because the world has become global, a lot of the programs and conventions and fairs are now online. And so one of the things that you can do well to do is Google for a cashew fair or a cashew convention. I know that the one for Africa was held in September. There should be a global one next year. And when you attend these fairs, the chances or the likelihood of meeting buyers real time is higher than when you use the B2B websites, which could also be good. So when you attend some of these fairs, you are able to meet some of these buyers. What you could also do is take advantage of the chambers of commerce, where you can get information on buyers. Another thing you could actually do is to try the Nigeria Export Promotion Council. So a lot of people don't give so much credit to the Nigeria Export Promotion Council, but they are doing a lot. So when you visit their website, there's some of this information that you can get there. Lastly, Terfa mentioned the ITC, and there's a market tool that the ITC has that you can use to identify markets for specific products. So when you do all of these things, you'll definitely find buyers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tokunbo. Right, so somebody wants to know if they can meet the speakers directly. So speakers, please feel free to put in the chat box any form of communication you would like the audience to use to get in touch with you directly. So Mike says, thanks, Jennifer. I'm excited to learn that you and your team have been doing what you can to put the legal framework in place. That's a question. I am happy to support the legal framework process. Jennifer, since I have excellent experience in this area, having successfully blocked several clandestine IP theft moves by these individuals and entities. Okay. Okay, so the website for the Nigerian Export Promotion Council is there. And then what's the other? Okay, so Tokunbo's right. So I think that we have come to the end of the questions on my part. Kingsley, I don't know if you have questions at your end that you want to. I think we can take one last one.
Yes, there is one more question. It was actually for Tola.
Okay.
So it says, the logistics problem for trade is huge for Nigeria, with delays at the ports and bad network for transport. How can this be solved? And also the question about significant differences to the trade protocols for the trade in intangibles, such as innovative properties and economic competency.
Yeah.
Tola.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I'll take the first one. On the logistics issue, right? I think that the 2, 3, 4 things that can be done, right? And I'll list them out. And I'll wear my hat both as a Nigerian previous trade negotiator, and I'll wear my hat also as someone who is helping build infrastructure across the continent, because there are 2 ways to approach it. You can approach it from a very Nigeria type approach, and the Nigeria approach would mean, listen, the problem with the ports today is that we majorly have one major port on the country, right? The Lagos Apapa port, right? That's the big problem. The problem is that when you have a country of over 200 million people and the volumes that we want to push, you cannot rely on one port, right? There's a bunch of other ports that are either overly specialized or are not deep enough for certain kind of vessels to arrive in. So, for instance, there's the Calabar port issue, there's the port in Onne, there's all of that kind of issues, right? So, one of the things to say is to strategically map the country and say, listen, how do I, over the next few months or next few years, ensure that we shift burden of export of using the ports to a bunch of locations? So you can say you map the country, maybe one or two. For instance, 1 or 2 port points, right? Then the second is that you then also rely on the airports a lot, right? So it makes no sense that we have no cargo type thing around Nnewi or Onitsha axis, because that's like a lot of where goods are being exported from. So you actually then have to strategize and say, listen, I as a government can focus on trying to make a lot of money from like cargo because I want planes to pay me money when they land, or I can crash the prices that I as farm and will make off that, but just make it faster and know that I'll make money off taxes a lot more. And so what you mean is you could strategically pick a number of airport regions around the country. I talked about Nnewi and Onitsha, right? And actually consciously bring down. So that means shipping strategically aligned around the country, then using some airports. Then the third thing you can also use strategic zones, right? So free trade zones. So we have a bunch of them that are not properly optimized. We have the one in Tinapa, we have the one in Onne. We have a bunch of them around the country. We have the ones in Lagos. They're not currently properly optimized. You want to then say, how can I also push manufacturing there so that we have a lot more aggregated sense of production? Because if you within on a port, for instance, right, you can reduce logistic concerns. So you know that the only big logistic you have to deal with is to getting things from your port to the free trade zones and to distribution within the country. Every other one, and that's very beautiful export. Then you can actually design for export very consciously. The African heart of it is to say, listen, there is now the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, right, which we help negotiate, right? And what that agreement does for you is that it ensures that Africa has one single market. It means that tariffs can come down. So you can say, what if I enter strategic partnerships with places like Benin Republic or Ghana, right, who have good ports also and have land border crossings with Nigeria, and say, listen, things can come, you can then create, and they do it already in the EU, right? You have special segmented arrangements with those countries that allow people import into those countries. So I can import to Tema, right, or import to somewhere in Benin Republic, and then I split the tariffs, or I split the customs duty. I give them some administrative fee for it, because that way no one has to then import into Tema and then start smuggling to Nigeria, right? They can actually just do it the proper way, export to Tema because it's faster, and then bring things through the border to Nigeria. And then you can then focus on building the road infrastructure between Lagos and then Lagos or and Tema, all those kind of borders. Calabar has a good crossing relationship with like Benin Republic and all of that. So that's two ways to think about it. Think of it both strategically on an African point of view, and think of it strategically, and that's how I think you solve the logistics problem. On the second concern, which you talked about, and by the way, let me say this, we can't say we're serious about export as a country if we don't go sort out logistics. For instance, we're talking about super highways within ECOWAS, for instance. There's a bunch of things we need to go figure out. We're talking about massive trucking, and that's where innovation also comes in, right? Two of the companies we backed, we invested in, Cobo 360 and Lorry, have made a lot of return by just sorting out trucking across the continent. So there's a lot of value to be done there. And when I say invest, not the government now, I'm talking about future Africa. The second thing I was going to talk about, if I could step the second question again, I think this keeps my mind now. It's about, sorry, could you say the second part of the question again?
Kingsley, can you repeat the question?
Okay.
Second part of the question.
I think, are there significant differences in the trade protocols for the trade in intangibles, such as innovative products and economic competencies?
Thank you. Yeah, so definitely there is. So for context, a good chunk of the protocol for intellectual property is still being negotiated. It's not finalized yet. There's still live negotiations on it. But like the truth is, in most jurisdictions, right, the rules around intangibles takes a while to negotiate. Even within the WTO, right, the TRIPS still gets debated a lot. The TRIPS agreement still gets debated a lot. But the second part is that there's also the conversation about TRIPS plus and TRIPS, right? Which is that TRIPS sets a minimum standard, but some countries choose to go above it and below it. So there's still that conversation for intangibles particularly. I know that within the AFCFTA, there's a lot of debate about how that would happen. So some countries like South Africa are pushing a lot more for TRIPS plus, which means give higher protection than even TRIPS. Some countries like, let me mention, are just trying to maintain the TRIPS obligation. And don't forget that what you see happen is that most countries in the AFCFTA are also WTO countries. So the TRIPS applies to them whether they want to or not. So what they have to decide is whether they're going to maintain the same TRIPS obligation or a TRIPS plus obligation. Which means, am I going to have the minimum standard at WTO? Am I going to have an higher standard? But the truth, of course, is that managing tangibles like goods is definitely going to be, the agreement for it is definitely different from managing intangibles like services and even intellectual property. And the reason is that one of them can travel across borders a lot easier and a lot faster. And so you want to consciously optimize for that. So for instance, some of the rules around services and intellectual property is about ensuring that people don't have a preference for their local citizens over internationals, over AFCFTA citizens. But in goods, a bit different, right? Because most of these goods have to come through the port. There's a better tracking system for that and all. So the rules definitely are different. You can go read the AFCFTA protocols. There are a lot of abridged guides to that, by the way, but the protocols clearly set out some of the rules around for goods and some of the goods around for services. And you already see those distinctions in how those two things are done. But intellectual property is still being negotiated. There's advanced draft, there's a lot of recommendations. But like a good guide to use is just look at what TRIPS has, the TRIPS agreement. The reason is that the AFCFTA has modeled a lot after the TRIPS and has just improved upon the TRIPS and improved upon the WTO agreement. So you get a lot of guidance there, but yeah, the rules are different. And you want to get an expert like, to help walk you through that process and design that for your business also.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think all of you have been fantastic, and this has been the most informative and useful seminar, but we've got to call it to an end. I'd just like to call on Deepa Faulkner to quickly say a few words so we can round up the program as we try to be on time. But this is exactly 2 minutes past 1, so hopefully with 5 minutes past 1, we should be closing. So Deepa, please. Is Deepa there? I thought I just saw him.
Okay, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. On behalf of the American Business Council and Lagos Business School, I'd like to thank everyone who's attended this session. I believe that there's no better time other than now to build capacity on trading in the global economy. International trade has transformed dramatically over the years with the help of digital economy, which facilitates real-time deals and provide platforms to showcase services and products in digital space. In Nigeria, business trading with the global market has been fraught with challenges due to the low or no adherence to the necessary requirements and infrastructure deficit in the economy. In August of this year alone, 76% of Nigerian goods exported, mainly agri commodities, were rejected by the international trade market. This also shows in the global competitiveness ranking of 2019, which Nigeria ranked 116 out of 140 countries. As we all know, the SME space is the bedrock of any economy, and sessions like this help to create awareness on how business can compete in the international market. I'd like to thank the speakers for their insightful presentations and their insights, as well as thank the organizers for setting this up and hope to see the project expanded further. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a wonderful day and do enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deepa. Right, so to everyone who has been able to connect and who's been listening, we hope you found this really interesting. And this is just one of the several opportunities we create for learning at LBS. So we look forward to seeing you on either of our programs, whether it's the MBA program or the other executive programs, which are shorter. And we look forward to hearing from you. Our speakers, you've been wonderful and you've shared very important information. And I look forward to working with you guys in future to work on more seminars to help promote opportunities for export, as it's one very important way to revive the Nigerian economy. But we know that it's also full of booby traps, so people need guidance. Thank you all so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care of yourselves and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.